Alright guys, let's talk about some of the most evil human experiments that actually happened in Nazi concentration camps. First, we have to talk about an experiment that involved inseminating a woman with animal sperm. Yeah, let's just get right into it. Basically, the Germans at the time were trying to figure out a way to sterilize millions of Jewish women so that they wouldn't be able to reproduce and stain the world. But the specific experiment that I want to talk about was conducted by Karl Klauberg, an evil German gynecologist who conducted a series of just disgusting human experiments in the Auschwitz concentration camp. Basically, first what he would do is he would x-ray the woman to see if there was any initial obstruction on their ovaries. Which sounds innocent enough, right? Well, when he made sure that there was no obstructions, he spent hours injecting caustic substances, which are chemicals that basically burn or corrode your skin, right into their uterus, and get this, he used no anesthetics. Just take a second to imagine how painful it is to have your genitals disintegrate from the inside. That must have killed. Well, it literally did, because not only were 700 women totally sterilized, but countless suffered from permanent injuries to their genitals and some even died. Oh, and it doesn't stop there, because this dude would take their bodies, open it up, and have their cervix and wombs removed. Yeah, now you're probably wondering what happened to the woman that refused to take part of this experiment. Well, good question. They were deemed as unfit test subjects and they were sent off to the gas chambers, where you know what happens there. Alright, here's where the Nazis were somewhat considerate. I can't believe I just said that out loud. Due to the unwanted side effects from the injections containing iodine and silver nitrate, like vaginal bleeding and even cancer, radiation actually became the new go-to method for sterilization. Actually, I take back the whole considerate bullcrap, because long exposure to radiation not only causes radiation burns, but it also makes the victim totally infertile way faster. Oh, and get this, some women were made infertile without them even knowing. Yeah, because apparently the radiation could be administered without the actual subject knowing. I mean, the science part of all that is kind of cool, isn't it? I'm just gonna shut up now. But how did the Nazis actually know that the radiation was working? Well, after the exposure was completed, the Nazis would literally rip out the subject's reproductive organs. And you guessed it, without any anesthetics. And for the icing on the cake, Klauberg would taunt his victims by telling them that he inseminated them with animal sperm, and that they had a monster growing inside of their womb. Sounds pretty evil, right? Well, for the women of the Nazi concentration camps, it only gets worse. So there was another doctor in the camps working on reproduction as well? Well, not exactly. He was more focused on how stress affects a woman's reproductive system. And you guessed it correctly, the doctor was the one who was going to be creating the stress. Let's just say he psychologically tortured his subjects so much to the point where I think they would rather be sent to the gas chambers. Let me explain. This is Dr. Herman Steve. And basically, while Herman would experiment on the woman at the camp, he would tell the test subjects the exact date they were gonna die, then study their psychological distress on their reproductive ability. No, I'm not even making this up, and it somehow still gets worse. After they were executed, Herman would literally dissect their bodies to examine their organs. I really don't want to say this next part. Some of these women were also assaulted, sexually after they were told their death date. So get this, Herman could study the path of the sperm and if it slowed down with the stress of knowing they were gonna die. Like, I don't even know. But get this, it was later found out that Herman was carrying out these experiments with others, allowing the other SS officers to inject their sperm into the female subjects. The natural way. Just sick. But this video gets even more evil than that, and I don't blame you for not believing me. And with that, have you ever wondered the fastest way to cure hypothermia? No? Well, the Nazis at the Dachau concentration camp sure did. Because the way they planned to cure hypothermia was really just an elaborate excuse to torture the prisoners in the most painful way possible. Let me first tell you why the Nazis even cared about hypothermia in the first place. In 1942, during World War II, German Air Force soldiers were shot down and they dropped into the North Sea, where thousands of Nazis, you guessed it, died from hypothermia. Yeah, so now let me tell you about the type of experiments they were administrating to fix this problem. Actually, before I do that, I should mention the test subjects were war prisoners, often from Russia. Well, really any nationality or race that they could get their hands on. And while they were forced to participate, there were others who actually willingly volunteered. Why, you may be asking? Well, the prisoners were promised to be released or they had their death sentence cancelled. Unluckily for them, these promises were literally never kept. I mean, what did they even expect? Did they really think that a guy with a box mustache would keep his damn promise? Well, listen guys, this box right here will promise to keep making the best possible videos that I can for you guys, so join the other 3,640 people on the channel and subscribe. Anyways, prisoners had their whole body immersed in a tank of ice water, or they would be locked outside in sub-zero temperatures for up to 3 damn hours. Sometimes the Nazis would let the victims keep their clothes on, but most of the time they were booty butt naked. And like you would expect, it was so cold that it led most of them to lose consciousness. And get this, if the victims lost consciousness, they went through one of the most painful resuscitation procedures of all time. Like seriously, the Nazis prepared 7 different means of pure torture disguised as procedure. Just listen to what I'm about to tell you next. Subjects would be placed under a scorching hot sun lamp that would be so hot, it would literally burn off their skin. Then after, they were forced to have, intercourse with the woman for body heat. Then were burned internally with boiling water. Oh wait. This is the funny part. The Nazis ended up figuring out that the most effective way of resuscitation was just to be placed in a simple warm bath, which to me seems like common sense. Like, did you really have to try sun lamps and boiling water before the damn bath? Like, gosh. And listen, we're just getting started on the evil part of this whole video because this next experiment was even more cruel than the freezing human experiment. This is the high altitude experiment, which despite the super boring name, it's actually really fun. But again, let me explain some things to you first. So this is Sigmund Rasche, who had the goal of helping German pilots that were forced to eject at really high altitudes when they were shot down or something. So to recreate this environment of being 68,000 feet above ground, prisoners were placed in a low pressure chamber. Basically, this means that there was barely any oxygen in this steel room right here. Oh, and a quick side note that's actually quite interesting, Sigmund then performed vivisections, which is like organ harvesting, on the brains of the victims who died from this experiment. And get this, out of the 200 victims, 80 of them died, with the others that survived being straight up slaughtered. The low pressure experiment that was performed caused the victims to usually die from suffocation, while there were 2 doctors just sitting there and taking notes the whole time. Actually, let me tell you a specific story. The victim here was described as a 37-year-old man and he was in good health. After 4 minutes of him suffocating, the victim's head actually started to wiggle, and a minute later he would suffer from cramps and drop to the floor unconscious. Sigmund in his notes described that the victim was breathing around 3 times per minute. And to show you how crazy that actually is, the internet says an average adult takes 12 to 18 breaths per minute. Yeah, and like you would expect, he stopped breathing completely after 30 minutes. Oh yeah, and I should mention that after a while, the victim just started to turn blue and he was even foaming at the mouth. Alright, so now the question is, can anyone survive the low pressure chamber? Well, the Nazis were determined to find that one out because they would take prisoners that they were already going to kill and stick them into these chambers to figure out the big question. And here's something that's quite interesting. If a victim was successfully resuscitated, they were pardoned from death and sent to the concentration camp for a full life sentence. Hooray! I don't really know what's worse. I think I would have rather died instantly, which almost all of them did, except there were a few that survived but suffered exposure-related injuries. This next experiment is the homosexual castration experiment. Yeah, you heard me correctly, the homosexual castration experiment. What's more shocking about what I just said is that the experiment started out voluntarily, which you should probably take with a grain of salt because, like, really? So basically, the Nazis believed that if they castrated a homosexual man, then it would kill their sex drive and in turn prevent men from being infected with homosexuality. Yeah, that's literally the words they used. Okay, anyways, this is Carl Varney, a Danish endocrinologist who developed an artificial male sex gland, a capsule that would slowly release testosterone when implanted under the skin, with the goal of being able to convert homosexual prisoners to being straight. Originally, the capsules were tested on around 10 prisoners, and according to the Nazis, it was actually a total success, because the prisoners apparently reported having less sexual drive with other men. And like you would expect, they were just saying it worked in hopes that they would get released from the camps, or just flat out not get killed. Now, you've probably been wondering, are the implanted testosterone capsules safe for the body? Well, one man actually died from the experiment because of heart failure that was associated with infectious enteritis. This is when germs settle into your intestines, which was probably caused from the capsules being contaminated with bacteria. Oh, and another man died due to the inflammation of his cell tissues. So clearly not safe at all. Here's something that you may find interesting. The British and Danish saw this research as something worth looking into. So rather than Carl, the guy conducting all of this, being arrested for his war crimes, they instead let him continue the study. I mean, I can't believe someone even thought this would work. Now, let me tell you about the evil twin experiment that involved sewing two twins together to create one single human. And like usual, let me give you some background information first. So this is Joseph Mengele, who probably had the weirdest obsession ever with twins. No, like seriously, he was so obsessed that one witness even recalled how Joseph ripped an infant from its mother's womb, then hurled it into an oven just because it wasn't a twin. Okay, basically, there was a few things that the Nazis wanted to figure out about twins. Alright, first they wanted to know how genetic diseases originated and how it affected each one of the twins. And get this, all of the experiments were run on either Jewish or Gypsy kids, because it was believed that these kids are more vulnerable to certain diseases because of their degenerative blood. Yeah, this is really what they thought. Oh, and not only that, the Nazis wanted more twins to help push out the superior bloodline. So they studied how to increase the chances of having twins grow in the womb. So how was the experiment set up is probably what you're wondering. Well, everyone knows about the infamous train platforms at each concentration camp, and twins were separated from the other prisoners and were sent off to a lab for testing. Side note too, they would also take dwarves, people with different colored eyes, and anyone with physical disabilities. Anyways, one twin would serve as the control subject, and for anyone that wasn't paying attention in stats class, that basically means they were the ones that weren't having any tests ran on them. And the other, well, the other twin was the super unlucky one. What do I mean by that? Well, they would be subjected to not just blood transfusions, but also enforced insemination. What is it with Nazis and enforced insemination, man? Gosh. They would also infect one of the twins with typhus or another disease and transfuse the blood of the infected twin into the other. Oh, and they would also give them unnecessary amputations of their limbs. Many of the subjects died while undergoing these horrific procedures, which, given the context of this whole thing, may have been the preferable option. Now, take a guess on how many twins were subjected to this torture. 500, 700, 1,000? Well, you would be wrong. Over 1,500 twins were literally tortured. How many of the twins do you think actually survived these experiments? A, 1,000, B, 500, or C, 200? Well, if you guessed 200, you would be correct. Only 200 out of 1,500 twins actually survived. Now, if you thought that wasn't dark enough, there's a report from Auschwitz that one night Mengele personally killed 14, yes, 14 twins. How, you may be asking? Well, with the chloroform injection right to the heart, obviously. If one of the twins were to die from the injection, the other one would soon be killed and their death reports would be compared. Oh, and their eyeballs would be stolen. That one's not a joke. Wait. Did you really think I was done? Get ready for this. A survivor from one of these camps claimed that Mengele cross-transfused the blood of opposite-sex twins so that he could change their respective sexes. Yeah, they wanted to see if they could change their genders through a blood transfusion. Jesus. Also, they experimented on a twin's genitals and attempted to attach the urinary tract of a 7-year-old girl to her own colon. Oh guys, this man doesn't stop there. Another witness also described how he sewed two gypsy girls together, back to back, in an attempt to create conjoined twins. Good lord. And like you would expect, after multiple days of suffering, both of the twins passed away from gangrene, which happens when the blood flow to a large area of a tissue is cut off. Listen, I always knew that millions of people died from the Holocaust, but this video made me realize how painful some of their deaths were. But if you want to hear about more gruesome, gut-wrenching, and just flat-out evil deaths, click this video right here where I talk about death row executions that failed horribly. And don't forget to subscribe.